Here we have comedian George Carlin explaining the butchering of the English language by nefarious people. And it's all done with kindness in mind. It's actually done with compassion and leftist empathy, which means that it's cancerous and harmful for society. So he's talking about shell shock. Now, I want you to imagine what it's like to be under artillery bombardment. It is a deafening sound which can even cause blood coming out from your ears. You probably have witnessed, if you're in combat, you probably have witnessed your brothers in arms getting blown apart by artillery. So there's like blood, guts, dismemberment, just like the most harrowing thing that you can possibly imagine. And I would like you guys to think how it's like to be in the trenches and get just bombarded by artillery for 1 or maybe 2 days in a row. Like every one of those explosions, not only is it unnaturally loud, but you can also think that is the last one. Especially if you see, a couple of guys down the trench getting blown apart by one of the shells that actually hit the target. So I can't imagine the horror. I genuinely cannot imagine how awful it is like. And you also feel incredibly helpless because there's nothing you can do. You got to stay in that trench. And you just got to endure it. So it's no surprise that a lot of soldiers would have mental breakdowns due to this. And this condition was called shell shock. And as you can see, it's simple, honest, and direct language. Like, it actually says what happened. Like, this person has the 50-yard stare. He is shell shocked. He has been in the trenches. He have witnessed the horrors. So it's 2 syllables. Shell shock, it almost sounds like the gun themselves. And this was in the past. This is what people associated. Now the problem that the government had is that it doesn't really want to address the issue because you do need soldiers and they do need to stay in the trenches. So you don't really want to create a condition where they can actually get an out and they can say, well, I'm shell-shocked, I want out, right? So what they did is in World War II, they call it battle fatigue. So now it happens to every soldier, right? It's not just the soldiers that's in the trench. It just happens to any soldiers that in combat. Which is true. I mean, if you're fighting with a machine gun in Stalingrad or whatever, you are going to get shocked by what you're seeing. But obviously, it's not the same like shell shock. There's a different level. But still, the thing is there. And as you can see, it takes a little longer to say. Doesn't seem to hurt as much. Fatigue is a nicer word than shock. So, fatigue is something normal that happens. It's expected. You just need to rest a little bit and you'll be fine. So now you're using battle fatigue. But by 1950, in the Korean War, the very same condition was being operational exhaustion. So the phrase was set up to 8 syllables now, and any last traces of humanity had been completely squeezed out of it. It was absolutely sterile. Operational exhaustion. Like something that can happen to your car. And then barely 15 years later, we go into Vietnam, and thanks to the deception surrounding the war, it's no surprise that the very same condition was referred to as post-traumatic stress disorder. And now it's 8 syllables, and we've added a hyphen, and the pain is completely buried under jargon, post-traumatic stress disorder. I'll bet if they had still been calling it shell shock, some of the Vietnam veterans may have received attention they needed. And it's even worse than that, right? PTSD, again, it's supposed to be shell shock, right? Which is one of the most harrowing experiences that a human being can possibly endure. I have seen it attributed to people on Twitter. There's now psychologists that say, well, kids can have events that are PTSD inducing, which, maybe it's true, but I don't know what exactly can they experience that is literally the same as being under enemy artillery bombardment for 2 or 3 days in a row and seeing the corpses of their fallen comrades from underground just being unearthed as bits and pieces of cadaver just falls upon you from the sky, right? So maybe there should be a different word for it, You know, like maybe like the psychologist should use something else for someone that's on Twitter and they see like some bad posts and not associated with something that veterans get to see. But anyway, right, like this is what's soft language, the language that takes life out of life, and it keeps getting worse. Like there's many examples of this. The most common one is illegal, right? Like what is illegal? It's a person that did an act of illegality. So in a just society, legality has to be restored. Like this is a person that got into a place where they don't belong, right? So like they jumped the border, and because no one is above the law, as the Democrats remind us, that person has to go through the official channels. They gotta go back and come in the country legally. But instead of doing that, they're now changing the word. It's like undocumented migrant. It's kind of like he forgot his documentation at home. Like he didn't do a crime, you know, like you can be undocumented. It's like you just forgot your papers in the car and you're going to get them back, right? So it's like these types of things. And you get to notice that the left just expands the language. It's like from a couple of syllables, like simply honest, direct language, you go into soft language that's really long, right? It's filled with academic jargon and it's very dehumanizing. Now, the reason I'm bringing it up is because this came onto my timeline and I found it the most amusing thing ever. There's this article from the New York Post which says, Washington Post reporter says shoplifting not a big deal because the United States was built on stolen land. So the most absurd thing imaginable, the most antisocial thing, the most dangerous and harmful thing that a journalist can post has been said, right? Like you cannot have a functioning society if people loot and pillage their own stores. Because eventually businesses close down and you end up in a situation where you get food deserts and it's going to make life a living hell for the people in those communities, right? And I'm pretty sure the journalist doesn't live in those communities either. And I'm looking at this conversation between a representative, I think it's in Congress, right? And someone else from Twitter. And it's like, in case you're wondering, yes, she is. Never was a second thought. So while the left is doing their best to expand language, to make it as difficult as possible to communicate simple things, the right has reached a level of communication that does not even require words. Like, you don't even need to say anything. And what's interesting is that when you look into the comment section, as you can see, like, this has 6.2 million views, right? You look into the comment section, leftists have no clue what is being discussed. They're like, completely outside the conversation. They're like, what do you mean? What is she? What are you talking about? They're in disarray, and all the right-wingers get it. All the right-wingers like, yeah, we know. They're like the chosen ones from the Matrix, right? Like, they don't even have to check. They just know. They just believe. So I found this interesting, and it's everywhere you look. Like, right-wingers are reaching a level of understanding where they don't even need to speak anymore. And I think, like, this absolutely horrify the academics. Like this deeply concerns the social scientists. Let me know what you guys think, and as usual, I will see you in the comment section. Take care.